Okay, so hello and welcome to this webinar. It is focused on an important and sometimes underestimated stage of academic writing. Editing your paper is essential to achieve the goal of writing a convincing, high-quality product. It's very common that you believe you wrote exactly what you had in your mind, and then readers point out omissions, inconsistencies, misspelling, etc. Here we are to help you avoid those disturbing moments. Okay? Instead of a quote, that I usually include on the second slide of my webinars, a quote, but today I decided to include a graph that illustrates the writing process so you can see that stage 5 is part of the basic stages of that process. If you don't do it, your chances of failing increase and you want just the opposite. And this is the agenda for today. Before that, let me welcome Patrick, Philip, Takuto, Mairi, Cathal, Kennedy, and Nipuna. Okay, so first of all, we have a look at the kind of paper you are expected to create in terms of characteristics and structure. Then I will present criteria to evaluate the different aspects of your paper. Finally, the usual section of things to remember. Okay? You know that everybody thinks they know what an academic paper is. Usually it can be defined as a paper that is written for the school or university. Well, any paper written for an academic context can be considered academic, but not all of them are in fact academic papers. Now, you will know why. Many people may define academic paper as a written piece of information created for an educational setting. Is that a valid definition? Yes and no. Yes, because it is produced to be submitted and evaluated in an educational setting. And no, because it is not just another written piece of information. In other words, the context is conceived right, but the nature of the product is not. An academic paper is basically an informed argument created to persuade readers of the validity of such argument. That implies that the paper must include claims and evidence that supports them in order to be convincing. So, you are dealing with a task that differs greatly from other writing tasks. Welcome, Samira, Maria Victoria, and Tiffany again. Well, this is another Tiffany. I don't know. Okay. Because of the formality of the academic context, academic papers should have the characteristics presented here. When an essay, thesis, dissertation, or report is evaluated, these characteristics are considered, especially by committee members and your supervisors. That is why you need to understand and include each one of them in your paper. Let's have a quick look at each one of them. Your writing must be formal, and that means that certain type of language, like colloquial expressions, abbreviated forms of verbs, contractions, sexist or racial phrases, etc., cannot be used. Being explicit is a characteristic that avoids misunderstandings, and since you want to convince people of your argument, you need to be sure they interpret your writing as you intend. That's why it has to be explicit. Since your main goal is to convince people of the validity and appropriateness of your arguments, you should be precise in what you write. You need to use the language in a way that makes clear what you are talking about. That's what precise means in this context. Each type of academic text has its own structure. For example, the structure of an essay is different from the one of dissertations. If you're aware of that structure before writing, then you can follow it, and the information will be presented logically. Biases are preconceptions that you let influence your actions. Most of the biases in academic texts are done inadvertently, and that fact makes them risky since they can prevent you achieving your goal of convincing people. So you have to be aware, or at least to be attent to the possibility that biases are being included in your text, because they are a little tricky. They are difficult to identify it, but they can be there and do incredible damage to your paper. Academic writing requires that you behave responsibly in relation to the evidence provided, the handling of the information, especially when dealing with data, and the way you understand and acknowledge other people's ideas. Those things must be reflected in your papers. And finally, to convince people, you must present evidence that supports your claims. You cannot expect academic people to accept your views only because you say so, because you said it authoritatively. Support provides the elements necessary to evaluate ideas, and the process of reflecting, analyzing, and evaluating is what really convinces people. Welcome, Nathan. Okay, in order to write, evaluate, and review an academic paper, you need to know what its structure is. The first thing you need to define clearly is the types of papers that are under the umbrella term academic paper. Broadly speaking, there are 4 kinds of them: descriptive, analytical, persuasive, and critical. However, that categorization is not as straightforward as it may seem at first sight. Why? Oh, because papers which are written solely as one of the types mentioned are not as common as the combined ones. Different kinds of text are usually combined into just one unit that we call a paper, that takes readers from the level of description to the highest one of critique of claims and evidence. But that fact does not make the existence and significance of each type of texture untrue, and therefore you will benefit from understanding them. And that's what we are exactly to do right now. The simplest type of an academic text is descriptive. Its purpose is to give a specific information. For example, When you write a summary of an article or a report of the results of an experiment, that's a descriptive text. When you face the task of writing a descriptive text, it is a good idea to begin by establishing what will be its central point, what you really want to pay particular attention to. You will also need to rely upon concrete language to avoid any possible misunderstanding, since you are interested in communicating specific pieces of information. You will need to use different types of sentences so as to make the text flow. Otherwise, it would be boring. The second type of text that may be present in an academic paper is the analytical one. It is rare for a university-level text to be purely descriptive. Most academic writing is also analytical, and that means it includes descriptive writing, but the described facts and information are reorganized into categories, groups, parts, or types of relationships. Sometimes you work with categories or relationships that had been identified before, but many times you create them specifically for your paper. That proves your understanding of the content. The suggested actions in the slide are intended to help you visualize how to compose this kind of text. At the beginning of this webinar, I pointed out that the usual goal of an academic paper is to convince readers of how valid your point of view is, or a specific point of view is. The third type of text is the persuasive one, which intends to achieve that goal relying mainly upon the author's point of view. To reach such objective, the author needs to list the different reasons for their point of view, provide several kinds and sources of evidence, consider how their view compares to others, and present coherent arguments. This kind of text goes beyond the two former ones, the descriptive and analytical ones, but the fact that it is limited to discuss only one point of view hinders its impact to convince an academic audience. By the way, remember that under the handouts tab, you have this presentation in a PDF file. And because presented only one point of view hinders the impact of the power of the text to convince audience, that's the reason for the existence of the fourth type of text, the critical one. Critical texts are common for research, postgraduate, and advanced undergraduate writing. It has all the features of persuasive text, with the improvement of including at least one other point of view. So it becomes a kind of argumentative paper, and you have at least two different points of view. While persuasive text requires you to have your own point of view on an issue or topic, critical text demands that you discuss at least 2 points of view, including your own. Therefore, you have to summarize the read works, evaluate them, and support your discussion of them. And as a useful tool for you to create and review an academic paper, I have included this graph. that illustrates that composing an academic paper from scratch requires you to approach it with a plan and a set of strategies to be as effective as possible when creating the expected product. The reason for that is that you should deal with many things, and putting them together to function as a unit is certainly a challenge. Here you have a flow chart that illustrates the path from looking for the accurate and meaningful input information to the complete paper you must submit for evaluation. As you can see, writing a draft implies that you should apply not only guidelines, but also the rules of academic and scientific writing, including the structures that characterize it. Then, the written draft should be revised and proofread before being ready to be submitted. Those are steps that you must follow if you want to produce a high-quality product. And how do you know you have created such a high-quality academic paper? Checking it against different criteria. Let's see which ones. These are the elements of an academic paper that must be checked. Each one of them has a specific set of criteria. Although you can find many checklists that combine the elements to be checked, I decided to build 6 different sets of criteria to help you do a detailed review that really lets you find weaknesses and strengths. In other words, instead of giving you one checklist with everything put it together, I decided to give you 6 different ways of sets of criteria so you can make a detailed review of each element that is important for you to pay attention to. At the end, we will talk about if that is a pragmatic and a useful way of putting things. Okay? Well, the first thing to review is if you complied with the requirements your professor or university established for the paper. That is a pragmatic action that puts you on the right track. That's the first thing that you have to check, okay? Because if you have not, you didn't do that, then you have to begin again, okay? Because those requirements are imposed by your professor, your supervisor, or your university. And that means a lot. Well, I decided to focus on the most important academic paper you have to write, your thesis or dissertation. Therefore, I will present criteria to review each chapter of it. I mean, I know that I worked a lot, but I think that in this way, you can have a strong toolbox to do the review task better. This slide presents criteria to evaluate the quality of Chapter 1. As you know, it functions as a kind of lighthouse for you. Whenever a decision must be made, since it includes the main elements of your study: problem, purpose, research question, objective, etc. These criteria that I present in this slide are focused on establishing how clear, feasible, well-focused, unbiased, and consistent is what you wrote. All these criteria apply basically, in this case, to Chapter 1, even though some of them are used in other chapters too. Now, Chapter 2 is intended to provide a clear and comprehensive view of the context from which the problem and its possible explanation or solution emerge. That implies that you must ensure coherence, consistency, and critical analysis. The criteria on the slide can be used to check that. Chapter 3 is the roadmap you give readers to fully understand your study and even replicate it. Consequently, it must be precise, detailed, and supported so readers can know why you made each decision. And that's what is behind this suggestion related to chapter 3. Welcome, Mila, and of course, welcome back, my dear Adrian. Okay, chapter 4 is a kind of showroom to present your findings, and therefore, it must be well organized and must include the information in a clear, direct, precise, and consistent way. These criteria illustrate that when you look at them, what is behind them is present your information clearly, directly, precisely, and consistently. And that's what characterizes chapter 4. Chapter 5 is intended to discuss your findings in a persuasive way and promote your work as a valid and important piece of work. To achieve that, you need to be critical in an unbiased way and develop strong arguments with valid claims, sensible reasons, and relevant evidence. The criteria in the slide illustrate what your chapter should have. These criteria are very important to be sure that your discussion of your findings, your conclusions, and recommendations are well developed, are clear enough to be not only understood, but also evaluated. And also that they ensure that the information is presented in a way that can really reflect what was in your mind when you wrote the paper. Well, another element to review is the coherence and consistency of your paper. Without these two things, your paper will be perceived as chaotic and unconvincing. If you check these criteria, you will realize they ensure connections and a smooth flow of ideas. That helps readers follow your line of thought and evaluate your work easily. I think that nothing is more annoying and disturbing than a paper that is not coherent and in which terms, definitions, concepts are not presented consistently throughout the whole paper. Some students write, let's say, a research question in chapter 1, then mention a different one in chapter 2, then have a complete different wording in chapter 3, and you as a reader begin to say, wait a minute, what the real research question is, because this person is changing it. And if you are not a linguist like my dear Adrian, I can tell you that you better use exactly the same wording of a research question or of the problem or of the objective in each chapter of your dissertation. You may say, oh, that's boring. It could be boring, but it will ensure that you can present the same idea, the same concept throughout the whole paper. And if you can be or get a little creative, you can change meaning, and that could lead you to a disaster. So it's better to be boring because you are not writing a novel. You are not writing a short story. You are writing a dissertation. So better to be boring than better to be confusing. Okay. This is another important element to review. Grammar and mechanics are usually small items in a big pond of things to consider. However, they contribute enormously to give readers a good impression of your writing and commitment, and therefore create a positive context for a fair evaluation of your paper. If you present a paper with misspelled words, with critical grammatical mistakes and that kind of things, readers will say, well, come on, if this person cannot write a well-written paper from the grammatical or the grammar point of view, how can this person expect me to believe their arguments? Okay, so they are small things, but you know, the small things tend to be very important things, even with people who, like me, are short. Okay. Acknowledging other people's ideas is a must in any academic paper, not only because of ethical reasons, but also due to pragmatic reasons in the sense of helping readers find the sources you used. Paraphrasing. Okay, Tiffany, don't worry. And remember that you are going to have the link for the recording and you can check it there. Don't worry. And you have the handout of the presentation. So, paraphrasing and interpretation of sources also show how well you understood them and how capable you were to produce a new version of something related to the topic discussed. That is a great plus for you and your work when you are able to show how well you have understood something and how capable you are of producing a new interpretation, a new view of the topic that is discussed. Okay? And finally, formatting your paper in compliance to the required style makes it a product that reflects academic formality. You know, it's a kind of beauty that makes readers comfortable and attracted to your work. It's a kind of dress that you put to your paper that make readers feel comfortable and attracted to what you have presented. And that opens the door for the readers to pay attention to your ideas. Well, it's time to present those small things worthy to remember, the tips and tricks. And I have 9 suggestions that can help you produce a high-quality academic paper right from the beginning. When you don't use them only to review your paper, use them also to write your papers, okay? And I hope that you reflect upon them and keep them near you whenever you are planning, writing, or reviewing academic papers. Okay. And please don't forget that reviewing before submitting your paper is not a waste of time, but an investment. It will save you a lot of disappointment and give readers a good impression of you and your ability to convince people. Okay? So thank you for registering for this webinar, and be with me in the last webinar of the first half of 2021. The next webinars will be in fall, and I'm looking for very interesting, some of them new topics to talk about. Now I'm open to your questions, comment, and what you need to, what you want to ask or share. Do you think that these things can be useful for you? What do you think about the fact that I didn't give you just one checklist, but 6 of them? Well, more than 6, 5 for chapters and 1, 2, 3 more. Oh, they are more. Adrian, agreed except for the definition of term section, I suppose. It would be circular reasoning or arguments if we define, for example, confirmatory research as a study that seeks to confirm the hypothesis put forward. Yeah, but when I talk about that consistency in wording, is especially with the problem, the purpose, the research questions, and the objective of your study. Those things should be always worded in the same way, because any possible change that you made can or could be imply a difference in meaning, and that can change everything. Okay, that's what I refer to. Pedro says, thank you very much, Maria. And Lulia said, thank you, Maria. It was very useful. Okay, I hope that you can, if you want to print or to have it in your computer, that when you say, okay, let me check, you don't have to do the whole task in one day. Today you say, okay, I finished chapter 1, let me check it. And you go to the chapter 1 criteria to know if it is well written or not, and you check it, and you do the same with the second one, and so on. And you say, okay, today is my moment to check grammar. And please don't rely solely on software to check your grammar things, okay? They do a good job, but read it by yourself and give it to other people to read it, okay? Adrian says, this slide set is a gem. We'll print it out and put it into my binder. Yeah, that's the idea. That's what I want you to do, to print them, to have them, to use them, and to inclusive. You can tell me, Maria, I found another important criteria that you can add to this set, and I'll do it. Philip said, thanks. Always helpful to see things compressed into a single document. I have it on the wall in my office. You know, that's why I really like, Philip, to put complicated things into just one easy to read and easy to understand document. I love that. And that is my main source of work, when I have to read a lot of things and then say, okay, now that I have all these things, how can I put it into just one document, just one presentation that anybody can understand easily? Philip says, Any recommendation on others' proofreading papers prior to submission, vetting the best readers? You know that there is one very interesting technique, which is the peers reading. Okay? And you know why that is important? I mean, you can have two different proofreading sources. Oh, three with you, of course, and fourth with the software. But give it to a person who doesn't know anything about what you are talking, okay, what you are discussing. Give it to that person and then tell that person, let me know, what do you understand of that? That will give you a good idea of how clear your paper is. And then you give it to a peer and say, please read this to me and let me know what your comments are, if you could understand everything or not. Okay, and that will give you another point of view, but about how well did you discuss the topic. So different sources can give you a very good idea of the quality of your paper. And you may say, well, but that's a long process, and that means that I have to ask other people to do things. Well, you can take your paper, not even read it or proofreading it, and give it to your supervisor, but that's a very risky action. When you give it to other people, it happens what I discussed this Tuesday, that you didn't, by the way, you didn't be there for the poster presentations webinar that I did this Tuesday. And in that webinar, I talk about how important is that people who know your topic can check your work, and people who don't know anything about your topic can do the same. Okay. Adrian said, Philip, I make regular appointments with consultant at my school writing center to have someone outside my field as my sounding board to see if things make sense. That's what I'm telling, right, Adrian? That you can use other people who don't know anything about your topic, and that will give you a very good idea of how clearly you have written your paper. Tiffany, any thoughts about when you are writing a joint manuscript with multiple authors? Well, I think, how do you keep it consistent? Well, I think that the first step to ensure that, Tiffany, is to discuss and set common ground about what are you going to say in that paper. So you need to establish specific objective, specific goals, and write a list of the ideas that you want to present in that paper. And all of the writers must be on the same track in relation to what the message should be. Of course, each one of them can have different points of view, and that can enrich the paper. But you need to be clear about, okay, what are the messages that we want to transmit? What kind of academic paper structure are we going to use? And how can we connect the different parts that we are writing? Because you need to connect that in order to make it function as a unit, okay? Philip says, thanks, Adrian, for the follow-up. I have an informal research group at work that will be very helpful, I think. At least you can try it, Philip. Adrian said, Tiffany, maybe first develop an agreed upon outline for the purpose collaboratively. Yeah, that's the thing. You have to establish common ground to create the paper. And then check constantly how each one of you are developing each part. And then when you try to put all the parts together, you have to agree upon a specific flow of ideas and line of thought that you are going to use. Okay? Any other question? Oh, there is a question and answer here. Nipuna, it was my pleasure, Nipuna, to present you this. Okay. Any other question or comment or something like that? Okay, so finally, I want to thank all of you that have not only registered for this set of webinars that I have conducted during the first half of 2021, because you have been a great audience. You have always participated. You have always put your mind into what I presented to you, and you have been critical of that, and that's great. You have suggested topics to create webinars, and please, if you can suggest topics for fall webinars, you can write me, okay, and suggest them to me. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. And as I said before, thank you very much to all of you.